Ah, you've finally come, Tessa. Lying in the hospital bed, my husband Terence, whose shoulder was immobilized in a cast, could only turn his eyes towards me, his face lighting up with a relieved expression. Then, looking up at me silently, he implored with a touch of impatience. "Please, can you wipe my body for me?" That is so Terence, a stickler for cleanliness. He must be frustrated not being able to bathe without the doctor's permission, but I felt no obligation to fulfill such a request. "What? After you cheated on me with my best friend?" I retorted coldly. But before Terence could respond, the partition curtain was swiftly drawn aside, and there stood my best friend Natalie, declaring, "What? It wasn't me." She seemed genuinely outraged, pointing towards the bed behind her. I looked at where she was pointing at to find. "My name is Tessa, a 42-year-old nurse. Since graduating from nursing school, I've been working at the public hospital where I am now, and it's been 23 years already. Promoted to head nurse last year, I've been busier than ever organizing study sessions for eager staff and ensuring a comfortable environment for our patients, amidst all the other duties. Naturally, my personal life tends to be postponed, with my rare days off dedicated to catching up on household chores and rest. Concerned about my lifestyle, my best friend Natalie would chide me. Seriously, what's with that look? There is such a thing as too casual, you know. She urges me to go get my hair done more and pay more attention to skincare. Despite her repeated admonitions, which I've always brushed off, leaving her exasperated, her recent silence on the matter feels both disappointing and somewhat relieving, a complex mix of emotions. But on a rare scheduled day off, Natalie invited me to join a mixer event. Natalie, like me, is single but had been married in her early 20s. Her marriage ended in divorce due to her husband's infidelity, and at first, she joked, "Ah, I'm done with marriage. I'd like to date again, but one marriage and one divorce are enough for me." However, recently inspired by a senior female colleague at work who married later in life and seemed genuinely happy, she mused, "Maybe marriage isn't so bad after all. I'm not getting any younger, and though I've learned how to deal with hardships, it feels lonely not having someone to share the good times with." So, she became keen on attending mixer events. Mixers, huh? Well, you always look great and younger than your age, so that may work for you, but I feel my age, I think I'm fine as is. Don't worry. The mixers I attend have a well-considered age balance among members. I kept on turning down her invite, which I felt bad, so I decided to attend it once, thinking it wouldn't hurt. I figured that would be enough to satisfy the persistent Natalie. That's how I met Terence at the mixers, who would later become my fiancé. Terence, a co-worker of Natalie's, was 6 years older than me, being 48. He had always wanted to marry but got so caught up in his job, which was so interesting, that before he knew it, he was his current age. It's not that I regret my choices, but I do think about having a partner to laugh with for the rest of my life," he said with a somewhat troubled smile, which made me smile too, and we naturally exchanged contact information. As we found time, we enjoyed meals and drinks together, went for drives to the countryside, and after about a year, Terence proposed. By then, I had also started to think that spending the rest of my life with Terence wouldn't be so bad, so I happily accepted his proposal. We decided to meet each other's parents, but Terence's, especially his mother Matilda, was visibly disappointed to meet me, knowing I was already over 40. Furthermore, after asking about my university and current job, Matilda remarked to Terence's father, Talon, "A younger daughter-in-law might have given us grandchildren to look forward to, but a nurse, well, that's passable, I guess." While Matilda spoke, Talon looked at her with a pained expression, and I hoped he would reprimand her for her rudeness, but instead, he said, "What's passable about it? Whether she's a nurse or whatever, an old woman is still an old woman. Those were the words that came out of his mouth. I glanced at Terence, who just gave a wry smile, not rebuking his parents but just laughing in his usual troubled way. Then, a smug Matilda said, "That's where you're shallow, Talon. If our daughter-in-law is a nurse, she can take care of your mother, who we're currently paying to keep in a nursing home. That way, we wouldn't need to spend on retirement home fees. A daughter-in-law can provide 24/7 care for free." Terence really has an eye for practicality. Talon quickly looked convinced and nodded to Terence, apologizing. "I see your point. Sorry for not understanding your intentions right away." Terence then dramatically sniffled and said, "As long as you understand, that's all that matters." Which was more terrifying than shocking to me, and I can't quite remember what happened after that. Dazed, I got into Terence's car for the ride home, and then he said, "So, when do we visit your parents' house? Since we'll be cutting ties after marriage, it'll be the first and last time. Maybe we should book a French restaurant or something?" When Terence said that, I came back to my senses. "You don't need to come over for a greeting," I coldly replied. But it seemed my icy tone didn't get through to Terence, as he cheerfully said, "Oh, really? Well, it saves unnecessary expenses. That's one of the reasons I thought you'd make a good wife." I was so fed up that I wanted to retort. But it seemed I had been clenching my jaw unconsciously while at Terence's parents' place, and a terrible headache had started to set in. So, I told him he didn't need to drop me at my apartment and asked to be let out at a nearby bus terminal instead. "What? Are you serious? You have a headache? Have you been sick this whole time? That's the worst, not being able to take care of yourself." He didn't even drive me to the bus terminal but pulled over to the side of the road, urged me to get out, and left without looking back. As I hailed a taxi home, I slowly came back to my usual self and started to feel genuinely irritated remembering what Terence and his family had said. I was shocked to hear for the first time that Terence's grandmother was in a retirement home, and they wanted to eliminate that expense by turning me into a free caregiver. I was angry with myself for not seeing Terence's true nature after a year of dating, but fortunately, we hadn't applied for a marriage license yet, so calling off the engagement would be easier than getting a divorce. Thinking this over while taking a shower at home, I decided it was best to act quickly and resolved to tell Terence the next day that the wedding was off, falling asleep with that determination. The next day, I apologized for the suddenness but got my shift covered at the hospital and headed to Terence's apartment. Ideally, I should have set up an appointment in advance, but at that moment, I was filled with the desire not to waste any more time talking to Terence. I figured that since it was Saturday and Terence should be off work according to his calendar, an early morning visit would surely catch him at home. However, despite going to Terence's much-vaunted high-rise condo, calling from the entrance yielded no response. So, I sent a message through my phone, but it wasn't even read. Emails and phone calls were met with the same silence. Honestly, as much as I had psyched myself up, the lack of response was disheartening, but since I had taken the day off, I decided to resolve things once and for all and headed to Terence's parents' house. It was possible he had gone back there after our last encounter and stayed over. Even if Terence wasn't there, simply telling his parents, "I could never be a daughter-in-law to your family," should easily end the engagement. Fortunately, we hadn't held an engagement party, and there were no financial commitments like an engagement ring or wedding venue reservations. Thanks to this, I thought calling off the engagement would be straightforward if we both agreed. So, I took a taxi to Terence's parents' house, which I had just visited yesterday, but before getting out of the taxi, I saw Terence, his parents, and a woman with a familiar silhouette, a total of 4 people, getting into a car. Feeling uneasy, I asked the taxi to follow Terence's car, which led us to a family restaurant's parking lot about 15 minutes from the house. After having the taxi drive past and then make a U-turn to come back, I got out and headed towards the entrance of the family restaurant. Given it was a holiday morning, the restaurant was bustling with families enjoying breakfast and people seemingly about to embark on trips, likely due to the nearby highway entrance. Sneaking around the shadows of the restaurant, I spotted the group of 4 at a booth by the window. I asked a server to seat me in a booth directly behind them, cleverly concealed. The divider between us was lined with potted plants, allowing me to hear them well without being seen unless I stood up. After quickly placing my order and tuning in, I heard Talon, whose demeanor towards me had completely flipped from the day before, saying warmly, Natalie is young and honest. We'd be absolutely thrilled if you became Terrence's wife in the future. Can't wait for that day. Natalie? That Natalie? Realizing this, I was shocked to my core. It made sense why the young woman I glimpsed from the car window felt familiar. It was my best friend, Natalie. Natalie was dating Terrence? They did work at the same company, but since when? Since Terrence and I started dating? Or had they been together even before we were introduced at the mixers? Then why did Terrence date me and even propose? My mind was swirling with questions, but I focused hard on the conversation next door. It turned out that Terrence and Natalie had recently started dating, and marriage was already on the table. Not just Terrence's family, but Natalie too, was aware of the marriage talks between Terrence and me. I began to wonder why they wanted to marry me off to Terrence. Was the joke about having a year-round, free caregiver not just a bad joke? Truth is, I don't want to marry some old woman, but I've heard she's quite wealthy. Perfect for taking care of grandma until she passes. Meanwhile, I can keep seeing Natalie on the side. Hearing Terrence say this, Talon and Matilda added, If we end up with a grandchild, we can tell her it's not the child's fault, so please step aside and get a divorce without compensation. Better yet, we might even be able to get compensation from her. That's a brilliant idea. If we claim she was rough during the caregiving or something, it might be surprisingly easy. They laughed without a hint of remorse. Hearing this, my anger towards Terrence's family and Natalie was boiling, barely contained as I continued to eavesdrop. I learned that Terrence and Natalie planned to use the upcoming 3-day weekend for a trip together. Their destination was only accessible by car, through rather rough terrain, so they planned to rent a new 4WD from a rental shop near the family restaurant after their meal, a trip that apparently warranted a send-off from the parents. Fueled by anger, I decided against confronting them on the spot, choosing instead to gather evidence before showing them hell. I discreetly left the restaurant before they did, crossing the street to a convenience store to watch from a distance. Soon, Terrence's parents drove off towards their home, while Terrence and Natalie, donning matching caps and pulling carry-on bags. After verifying on my mobile phone's map app that there was a rental car shop about 200 meters away, it seemed they were headed there. I was filled with anger while watching their backs. Then I turned away to grab a taxi. Since I had swapped shifts for a night shift that day, I focused on my work without any distractions until Sunday morning. When my shift ended, I planned to head straight to my apartment to get some sleep, but I noticed an unusually high number of missed calls, messages, and emails on my mobile phone. Most of them were from Terrence, and the rest were voicemails from unknown numbers. Curiosity piqued, I listened to the voicemails, finding one from an administrative staff at a hospital in the tourist area where Terrence and his group had mentioned visiting, stating, "A patient who was admitted last night after a self-inflicted accident asked us to contact you. They urgently request a callback." While part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction thinking it was divine retribution, I was more intrigued about why they contacted me. Reluctant to call Terrence directly, I searched for the hospital online, called the main line, and asked to be transferred to the administrative staff who left the voicemail. They quickly filled me in on the details. Afterward, I arranged for an Amtrak ticket to the nearest station to the hospital for the next day and went to sleep. Departing early the next morning, I arrived smoothly at the hospital. I waited at a nearby cafe until the hospital's visiting hours on holidays before going to Terrence's room at the right moment. The room was a double, and Terrence, closer to the door, was lying down with his shoulder tightly bandaged and his left leg in a cast. Noticing me but unable to move without pain, he just looked at me and weakly smiled, saying, "Tessa, I can't believe you came all this way." "Thank you." He might have been trying to elicit sympathy, but I was well aware of their schemes. Standing silently, Terrence started to ramble in a panicked tone, but I gave no response, continuing to ignore him. Frustrated, Terrence snapped, "Please, could you wipe my body for me?" Then he gestured with his chin toward a table nearby. Looking over, I saw a thin towel still in its bag, presumably bought from the shop. Glancing at the towel, Terrence grew more impatient as I remained silent, clicking his tongue in displeasure and saying, "Come on, just do it already. What's the deal with you?" I quickly approached the bed, leaned towards Terrence, and coldly said, "What?" "After you cheated with my best friend." Before Terrence could respond, the curtain dividing the beds was flung open, and Natalie exclaimed, "What? I'm not the one," pointing behind her to a woman lying on the bed, shrinking her back. "This guy's affair was with this woman." Shocked by Natalie's sudden appearance and the unfamiliar woman lying in the bed, I watched as Terrence, observed by all, shouted at Natalie, "What are you doing? Stop lying, get out of here!" and started to throw whatever was within reach, like pillows and water bottles, at Natalie. Several nurses and I managed to restrain Terrence, who glared at Natalie with frustration. Natalie, unfazed by the commotion, remained calm. When I whispered to her, noting the woman's resemblance to Natalie in hairstyle and physique, "Is that woman over there, Natalie, not actually Natalie?" Natalie's face turned red with anger. "You can't possibly think I was that guy's affair partner, do you?" And so she snapped at me. "Sorry, that's what I thought," I said timidly, and to that, she let out a loud sigh. "Don't be ridiculous, I'm not that terrible." She made a face of disbelief. Terrence fell silent, and ignoring the other woman named Natalie, Natalie explained that about 2 months ago, she accidentally saw Terrence and Natalie arm in arm, walking through the city at night. Knowing I was dating Terrence, Natalie suspected an affair but decided to gather solid evidence before confronting me. As I overheard at the family restaurant, Terrence and Natalie weren't just having an affair, they planned to marry me off to Terrence while enjoying a secret polygamous relationship, making me take care of Terrence's grandmother. Following a message I sent about being proposed to, Natalie hurried to get photos of Terrence and Natalie together as conclusive evidence. Then, hearing from a friend in HR that Terrence had an accident while on a trip, Natalie rushed over, thinking I might be involved. Terrence rented the car through the company's welfare program, so they were notified immediately about the accident. I tried calling Tessa, but couldn't reach her. Then I arrived to find this woman, the mistress, hospitalized in the same room. I was worried you would be shocked if you found out like this. Indeed, I did show up, but something seemed off to Natalie. Wondering what was happening behind the curtain and watching anxiously, Natalie was surprised to hear me accusing Terrence of cheating. Natalie was even more shocked I mistook her for his affair partner. I then told her about witnessing Terrence with another woman, Natalie, who from a distance looked much like Natalie, at the family restaurant and his family's home. Given Matilda's comments, I assumed she was younger, thus it was my mistake for thinking it was Natalie. Natalie and I, close friends indeed, but she's nearly a decade younger than me. Originally, Natalie was my childhood friend's younger sister. We only became closer after my friend passed away because of an accident. Despite Natalie's easygoing manner with me, I wondered if she found our friendship burdensome due to our age difference and different careers, perhaps creating an invisible barrier between us. Apologizing again, Natalie, with a mischievous smile, said, "Well, if you're fed up with these terrible people, there's no need for me to hold back. Time to give them hell." Terrence and Natalie flinched at Natalie's resolve, but Terrence bluffed. "What hell? Don't make me laugh. I was just putting up with this old woman because she seemed useful. Happy to break up if you want." Natalie provocatively replied. "Oh really, Terry? What were you two talking about before I snuck into this room?" And then brandished something she had been holding, drawing everyone's attention. It was a voice recorder. Natalie revealed that at the time of the accident, Natalie, not Terrence, was driving despite being suspended from driving. They had declared only Terrence would drive to the rental company, and after enjoying drinks at a hotel lounge, they decided to drive to a scenic spot despite having consumed alcohol. Natalie had recorded their conversation. As Natalie finished her explanation, Terrence snatched the recorder from her hand and tossed it into a water pitcher, groaning in pain. "Too bad, there goes your evidence." But Natalie, with an even more wicked grin, revealed a smaller voice recorder in her other hand, saying, "Sorry, not stupid enough to show the enemy the crucial evidence." She also showed a pen-shaped digital voice recorder in her pocket and a voice recorder app open on her mobile phone, smirking. "See, I'm quite competent at my job." Then, turning serious, "You'll pay for hurting my best friend," she said with a threatening tone, staring directly at Terrence. Caught off guard, Terrence fell silent, but then Natalie confronted him head-on. "You fool! It's all because you and your parents blabbed too much, ruining the entire plan. It's you who should be taking responsibility, not me," she shrieked at Terrence. Hindered by her hand being in a cast and support, she couldn't get close enough and just gritted her teeth in frustration. Terrence, lifting his head, retorted, "Shut up, you awful woman. Being young is all you have going for you. You misunderstood and thought you could be my wife? With a woman as frivolous as you, I'd only end up being cuckolded. Like I would fall for that?" He too lowered his cast-covered leg from the bed, lashing out at Natalie with the intensity of someone about to physically grab her. Truly, they were both as despicable as the other. In a way, they were perfectly matched. Anticipating that a nurse would soon arrive to scold us, I urged Natalie, and we stood up to deliver our final ultimatum to the two in the bed. "Enough, you're both so noisy. Truly a match made in heaven. A despicable woman cozying up to a man engaged to someone else and a foolish man thinking he's clever, being easily manipulated by a trifling woman. Just so you know, I have no attachment to you, only bad feelings," I declared, then left the room with Natalie. Ignoring Terrence's calls and Natalie's yells from behind the closed door, we walked away. Before leaving the tourist area, I visited the stores and hotels damaged by Terrence's rental car. Initially met with coldness, their demeanor changed once we explained our situation, earning their sympathy. We advised the delicatessen owner, who suffered significant damage. "It may come out during the police investigation, but the driver who crashed into your store was likely drunk and on a suspended license. You might not be able to use insurance, and worse, you could end up not receiving any compensation at all." We promised to send a copy of the recording from the hospital room, where Terrence and Natalie admitted to drunk driving and attempting to make me their scapegoat. Natalie advised acting quickly, especially since tracking Natalie, still in her probation period, could become difficult if she left her job amidst today's privacy concerns, and asked, "Please keep the source of information confidential." She then shared everything she knew about Natalie, such as her approximate home address, current residence, and her provisional employment through executive connections, likely underwritten by a senior executive. The shop owner, whose business was wrecked by the runaway car, thanked us repeatedly. But actually, we're the ones who should be thanking them. The shop owner has a legitimate claim against those two people, and if it's exercised to punish both Terrence and Natalie, it is a very pleasant situation for us. Returning home with Natalie, we learned that the hospital soon advised the badly behaved pair to transfer, effectively being kicked out. Upon hearing the news, Terrence's parents rushed over but were met with hospital bills for the damaged equipment and surgery costs. The cash they had on them wasn't nearly enough, and even after selling bags, watches, and jewelry at nearby pawn shops, they still fell short. Eventually, they borrowed money using their sedan as collateral from a lender known for harsh terms, likely resulting in the loss of the vehicle, the delicatessen owner informed me gratefully over the phone. The accident, luckily not involving others, was a solo crash possibly hidden to conceal Natalie's drunk driving and suspension. They hadn't reported it to the police, likely leaving them without an accident certificate. Drunk driving and suspension coming to light would nullify their personal injury insurance and any coverage for the wrecked rental car. Thinking of the debt hell awaiting them almost made me laugh uncontrollably. I then hired a lawyer to formally demand compensation for breaking off the engagement from Terrence. Terrence's parents, concerned about their reputation, offered, "We'll pay double the going rate for a quiet settlement." Despite the offer to call it a parting fee to avoid the negative connotation of compensation, accepting money under such pretense could later obscure who was at fault for the engagement breakup. Therefore, I rejected Terrence's parents' proposal and demanded a signed document alongside the compensation payment, explicitly stating the breakup was due to Terrence's infidelity. When my lawyer pressed, "If you're not willing, we can settle this in court. Is that what you want?" Terrence's parents reluctantly went to the hospital to have Terrence sign the document and transferred the full compensation amount, bringing me relief. In reality, if the case had gone to court, the fact that there was no engagement party, no wedding venue booked, and no engagement ring exchanged between Terrence and me might have raised questions about the engagement's validity. Even if I had strongly argued my case, how a judge or any third party would decide was uncertain. Concerned about this, my lawyer proposed a strategy to press for payment without giving them time to think. This led to Terrence's family, who wished to avoid further turmoil, to comply with the payment. Truly naive people. Upon receiving confirmation of payment from Terrence's parents, I checked my bank account and proceeded with the next steps. First, I reported to the police about Natalie driving the rental car while intoxicated, along with the recorded evidence. The police contacted the rental company, which promptly sent their legal counsel to visit. After returning from the hospital and in an attempt to silence us, I printed out numerous SNS message screenshots sent by Terrence and Natalie, along with the recorded data of our exchange in the hospital room. Handing these to the legal counsel, he grinned appreciatively. "Thank you for everything. This allows us to swiftly proceed with the damage claim." He left, seemingly lighter on his feet. Later, a luxurious assortment of suites arrived from the rental car company and their counsel's office, accompanied by a letter. It stated that based on the evidence I provided, they notified Terrence and Natalie of a lawsuit for damages due to the nearly new rental car being totaled in the accident they caused. They also filed a police report, pushing Terrence and Natalie into a corner. Despite hiring their own lawyer, who advised them they had no chance in court, they managed to settle by paying the demanded amount. However, this payment made it difficult for Terence to keep up with his payment for the high-rise condo mortgage, forcing him to sell. Despite its brief occupancy, a used property is still used. It sold for about half of Terence's expected price, and even dedicating all proceeds to the mortgage, a substantial debt remained. Furthermore, at the time of the accident, the delicatessen that Natalie's rental car crashed into claimed approximately $350,000 for the repair of the severely damaged store, replacement and repair of dishes and cooking equipment, cost of ingredients purchased for the holiday weekend, cost of alternative items and apologies to customers who had reservations, lost earnings due to the store being closed during the peak tourist season, and the cost of a delivery vehicle that was totaled. Heeding the advice from Natalie and I, the store demanded immediate full payment from them, threatening legal action if they did not comply. Normally, compensation for the store would be covered under voluntary insurance for property damage, but Terence and Natalie had not opted for the insurance option when renting the car, and the property damage coverage was limited to only $200,000. Moreover, since Natalie, who was on a suspended license and had been drinking, did not declare herself as a driver to the rental company, and no accident report was filed at that time, the insurance company denied coverage as we had anticipated. Ultimately, Terence and Natalie had to pay out of their own pockets. This led to a terrible fallout between Terence and Natalie, reigniting a fierce blame game between them. "I should never have gotten involved with a jinx like you. That's my line. You pranced around with your sloppy looks just because I was young. And to think you can't even cough up this amount of money, what a stingy old man you turned out to be." After hurling insults at each other, Terence and Natalie, who once vowed eternal love, found themselves embroiled in chaotic legal battles over defamation, insult charges, and damages claims. The ugly dispute, clear to anyone, struggled to find resolution, and Terence, already on leave from work due to injuries from the accident, further strained his employer's patience by missing more work for court appearances, leading to his demotion to a less critical position. Despite his wounded pride as a self-proclaimed elite, Terence found himself unable to quit due to various payments tied to this ordeal. On the other hand, Natalie, still within her probationary period, was exposed by Natalie, who was more angry than I was, for having inappropriate relations with several male colleagues, including some married ones. This revelation, disrupting workplace morale and potentially affecting operations, led to her swift dismissal despite being hired through connections. Moreover, several wives of the married men involved demanded compensation from Natalie in divorce settlements. Though each claim was settled for a standard amount, the total sum became quite substantial due to the number of claims. If Natalie has to pay the delicatessen's damage claims next, the debt burden on her, a 23-year-old woman, would be enormous. Struggling to make ends meet, Natalie's frantic job search ended in vain as potential employers requested a reason for her dismissal, forcing her to give up on full-time employment. Now, she juggles part-time jobs, occasionally seen rushing through the warehouse district, biting into a loaf of bread, unkempt and uncaring of her appearance, a sight relayed to me but of no concern. As for me, despite the heavy workload, I find my days fulfilling. It's a relief to be on good terms again with my dear friend Natalie, finding a silver lining after misunderstandings and miscommunications. The only issue now is Natalie's persistent nature, as she once again suggests. "Tessa, how about we hit up Mixers next time? It's an event organized for nice people who have been through a divorce, only the nice ones," they said. I really think it could be a hit this time. Not that I've grown wary because of Terence, but having rediscovered the joys of solitude, I'm currently trying to figure out how to gently dissuade Natalie from her frequent invitations.